bias and Kant's theory. Journalist Glenn Greenwald had the quote, and it pretty much says, no matter what you do in journalism, you're going to need facts. And although journalists must heavily rely on facts, what happens when facts are manipulated to only represent one side of the story? What is media bias? Media bias is the perception that the media is reporting the news in a particular or prejudiced way. Okay, there are several types of media bias. The most common are below: bias by omission, bias by placement, bias by labeling, bias by story selection, bias by sources, and bias by spin. Okay, bias by omission. Leaving one side out of the article or report or a series of articles or reports over a long period of time ignores the facts that could disprove the opposing side. And an example would be a 10-year-old government study was conducted and found that acid rain caused no discernible harm to forests or trees. This study is continuously ignored by the networks except CBS. 60 Minutes covered the story. Reporters in the present have continued to report on acid rain without checking the report. Bias by placement. A measure of how important the editor considers a story, used to downplay some information on either liberal or conservative party. An example, when liberals at the People of American Way released a report questioning the travel of the Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thompson, the Boston Globe ran the story front page. However, it didn't mention the organization until page 17. The Washington Post ran the story the next day and mentioned it in the very beginning. Okay. Bias by labeling. When the media labels a people or group, it can stigmatize them and alter their public perception. There are two ways of labeling: labeling one side extreme while leaving the other unscathed, terms such as far right, ultra conservative, liberals, moderates, etc. Another form of labeling is calling someone an expert in order to use them to support a certain side. Example, Fox News deemed Black Lives Matter as a murder movement last year when 2 police officers were murdered. Okay, bias by story selection. A pattern of highlighting news stories that coincide with the agenda of either the left or the right, while ignoring the opposing view. An example, the Washington Post dedicated 27 stories to the White House Chief of Staff, John Sununu, for extensive travel habits. At the same time, House of Armed Services Committee Chairman Les Aspin was traveling frequently as well. He flew in a government plane from a ski vacation. The Post didn't cover the story until it was confronted at a press conference. Bias by sources. TV news is increasingly dishonest in that increasingly its stories are gathering quotes and other material to fit a hypothesis, says Stephen Hess, one of the most quoted experts in Washington. Using more sources that support one view over another. Uses phrases like experts believe, observers say, and most people believe. There should be equal representation of both sides. In 1990, the Washington Post had 2 reporters, Spencer Rich and Barbara Bobeja, who wrote, "Economists across the political spectrum said yesterday the current economic picture could mean an even greater rise in poverty." They only used 2 indistinguishable sources who turned out to be liberal. Bias by spin. The story has one view or interpretation of policy event to the exclusion of the power by other. Focuses only on one point and hopes the rest will be ignored. Example, 3 Networks' response to the October surprise theory, which suggested that the Reagan campaign bargained with the Iranians to delay the hostage release until after the 1980 election. The networks did 27 evening news stories on the theory in 1991. But when Major Expose and Newsweek and the New Republic challenged the dubious sources behind the story, the network evening shows did nothing. By early 1993, Senate and House reports had thoroughly discredited the October surprise theory, but the networks failed to look at how they had been used. Stephen J. Allen, Media Bias. And here was a video on YouTube about a former ABC boss as he speaks on media bias and the state of media today. And then Can's view. Can't believe that we must do what is morally right because it is our duty. We must act as if our every action would be universal law. Moral worth comes from doing what is right, not because it gives one a good feeling, but because it's one's duty and he or she will do it even if he didn't like it. Can't believe that a person is good or bad depending on the motivation of their action and not the goodness of the consequences of these actions. All Sides and Media Bias. All Sides is a website that curates articles from major newspapers that are left, right, and centered. It allows the reader to get the whole story from looking at an issue from different perspectives, on all perspectives. It highlights biases and sorts them into categories such as left, right, or center. And these were my sources.